CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Live from London, this is The World Today.
Hello, I'm Jamie Owen. Welcome to the programme. Our top stories. Asia's leaders set out their plans for sustainable growth and financial stability against a backdrop of rising geopolitical tension. Our other headlines: the United Nations nuclear watchdog says the situation at Ukraine's embattled nuclear plant held by Russia has not improved during a rare visit to Europe's largest power station. Iran's foreign minister holds talks in Russia's capital with efforts to revive the 2015 nuclear deal high on the agenda. And why robots could harm civilization. Elon Musk and 1,000 other tech leaders call for a pause in the training of advanced artificial intelligence. Asia, and particularly China, will emerge as the major driver for global growth this year. So says the head of the Asian Development Bank at the Economic Bao Forum in China's Hainan province. More than 2,000 delegates from all around the world have gathered for this meeting, touted by some as Asia's answer to the Davos World Economic Forum. China's premier is set to deliver a keynote speech on Thursday. Well, let's talk to our correspondent, Jung Chung-ying, who's there for us. Chung-ying, what are the highlights? Talk us through what today holds.
All right, thanks. One of the many highlights of the day, of course, is the release of its annual economic outlook report, which said that Asia is expected to continue to advance its regional production, trade, investment, as well as financial integration and cohesion. And the report also acknowledged the influence China's economic growth has on output for the rest of Asia, and estimated Asia's weighted real GDP growth rate to be 4.5% in 2023. But the report also pointed out some of the challenges facing Asia's economy as well. For example, it urged Asia to address a sustained increase in debt levels in its emerging markets and developing economies. The report also spent quite a lot of time discussing the negative impact of aggressive U.S. Federal Reserve's interest rate hikes on Asian economies, and predicted that most Asian economies are expected to maintain a tight monetary policy this year. And the report also warned that Asia's labor market has not fully recovered, although it said that increasing stability of the exchange rates of major Asian currencies will help reduce imported inflation pressure. Also, the report called for closer cooperation among Asian countries at a time, especially when global supply chains are being regionalized. Take a listen.
It really is about commercial collaboration and making sure it is a win-win scenario and that the global economy, particularly at the multinational level, remains quite connected. To me, that's quite fundamental to what we're going to see.
How does the world come together to cooperate with one another? If we move towards infighting, towards more competition, not only the big powers, but many other regional countries will suffer.
All right, and another eye-catching highlight of the day is the meeting between Chinese Premier Li Qiang and some very important guests, including the head of the International Monetary Fund, where Premier Li Qiang said that China will be able to meet its development targets for this year as the country makes efforts to stimulate consumption and investment. And looking forward to the next day, it's also going to be a very important, a very big day, because as we all know that Premier Li Qiang will deliver a keynote speech, and all eyes are on that speech at the conference tomorrow morning. And also Singapore's Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong, Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez, Malaysian Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim, Georgia and Ivory Coast Prime Minister Patrick Archie will also attend the keynote speech. And there will also be some panel Thursday afternoon discussing various subjects, including ESG investment, including women leadership, and also energy revolution. So a lot to watch out for.
Chung-ying, thank you for that. Our
correspondent,
Jun Chung-ying. Now the rest of the day's news, and Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez is one of the international leaders attending that Forum for Asia. Spain takes over the rotating EU presidency later this year and is looking to boost an economic relationship with China that's worth over $50 billion a year. Our correspondent Ken Brown reports.
This is the Madrid to EU train. It's the longest cargo train journey in the world. It won't arrive at its destination in Zhejiang province for about 3 weeks. But while that may seem like a long time, it's still twice as quick as the sea route and produces a lot less pollution. This train, however, is about much more than just the products it delivers. It's symbolic of the strong economic potential that could lie further down the track. The Spanish government is looking for increasingly closer relations with China and ASEAN countries to help increase their export opportunities. Pedro Sanchez's visit this week to the Bao Economic Forum in Hainan is looking to help promote those ties. Over the last 10 years, imports from China have doubled to Spain. Spanish exports, although on a much smaller scale, have followed a similar trajectory.
I think that most of the studies that have been done, they project a trend that is very similar to what we have observed. So a steady growth, probably higher than what we observe in other countries. So exports and imports to China growing at a higher rate than the world economy in general.
The export market to China is very attractive for Spain, and while it lags behind some European counterparts, the potential is huge. China's growing consumer-orientated middle class, at over 400 million people, is now the largest such demographic in the world. The financial and investment sector is also expected to rise rapidly, with a particular focus on tech. GBS Finance are investment bankers who specialize in helping Spanish companies establish themselves in China and Chinese companies in Spain. For them, their advice is clear.
The distribution is essential in China. We are talking about 1.3 billion inhabitants and cities with 25 million inhabitants. So it's very relevant to have the right distribution, always with a local partner and definitely with a local team.
2023 marks 50 years of official diplomatic relations between Spain and China, and Sanchez's visit to China is significant. The milestone has been marked by numerous cultural events in both countries aimed at greater mutual understanding and appreciation. One highlight is the visit of the Terracotta Army exhibition to Alicante, which is set to receive a huge response. Economically, the two nations look on track for a closer relationship. Ken Brown, CGTN, Madrid.
China has warned the United States against a potential meeting between House Speaker Kevin McCarthy and Taiwan's leader Tsai Ing-wen, saying it would be a provocation. Tsai is embarking on a trip to Central America, which will see her travel through New York and Los Angeles. Beijing says it opposes any meeting. It called on Washington to abide by the One China principle. Thousands of Swiss women have joined forces in a groundbreaking legal case, arguing that their government's inadequate efforts to fight global warming violates their human rights. The female pensioners have brought the first climate change case to the European Court of Human Rights. They claim their country's inaction in the face of rising temperatures puts them at risk of dying during heat waves. The women's lawyers are seeking an ambitious ruling that could force Bern to cut carbon emissions faster than planned. Britain's King Charles is in Germany's capital, Berlin, for his first overseas state visit since becoming monarch. It comes as the UK seeks to improve ties with the European Union following its exit from the EU. Charles was originally meant to travel to France first, but cancelled that part of the tour due to violent unrest over President Macron's pension reform. UBS has rehired Sergio Ermotti as its chief executive to oversee the Swiss bank's takeover of Credit Suisse. Ermotti was in charge between 2011 and 2020 and guided the bank through the aftermath of the global financial crisis. He'll take over from the current CEO, Ralph Hammers, in April. The head of the United Nations nuclear watchdog, Rafael Grossi, has travelled to the Russian-held Zaporizhzhia power station in southeast Ukraine. It's part of efforts to try and prevent a possible nuclear disaster. CGTN's correspondent Michael Voss reports.
The head of the International Atomic Energy Agency, Rafael Grossi, wore protective body armor as he was taken through checkpoints in a convoy of vehicles heading to the nuclear facility. Zaporizhzhia is the largest nuclear power plant in Europe and has been under Russian occupation since the early days of the conflict. Moscow and Kiev have repeatedly accused each other of shelling the site. The nuclear facility has lost its external power supply 6 times over the past year, forcing emergency diesel generators to kick in to cool the reactors. Grossi described the situation as very dangerous and unstable and expressed concern about water levels at the reservoir supplying water to cool the reactor.
If the reservoir level goes down beyond a certain level, then you don't have water to cool down the reactors. And we have seen, especially in January, that the levels of the water were going down significantly. They recovered somehow in the past few weeks.
This is Grossi's second visit to Zaporizhzhia, and the IAEA has had a team permanently based there since last year. He's been pushing for a safety zone to be created at the plant to prevent a possible nuclear disaster. So far, attempts to broker a deal have got nowhere, but Grossi says he is adjusting the proposals and still hopes for a breakthrough. Michael Voss, CGTN.
Iran's foreign minister has been holding talks in Moscow with his Russian counterpart. The two countries are working on plans for a stronger economic partnership to minimize the impact of Western sanctions. Russia is now the single biggest overseas investor in Iran, and trade has increased threefold since the start of the invasion of Ukraine. Efforts to revive the 2015 Iran nuclear deal, which has been on hold for several years, is also a key part of this discussion. Well, let's talk now to our correspondent Stuart Smith in Moscow. Stuart, what more do we know about these talks, and what is Russia looking for here?
Well, if we start with trade and how important that is for both Russia and Iran, both heavily sanctioned countries, trade is one of the ways in which these two countries can become closer to one another and support each other with the economy. So Russia has the Caspian Sea to its south, and Iran borders the Caspian Sea. So one of the initiatives that Russia is closely pushing for with Iran is to try and make better use of that potential sea route from Russia through Iran and then on to other areas in the world without needing to navigate through the Black Sea, which of course is now very, very difficult. So more deals in line with that. Russia particularly is interested in exporting more of its agricultural goods to Iran. There's less cooperation in terms of Russian energy exports to Iran, but certainly advice that can be shared and documents signed which allow Russian and Iranian oil companies, for example, to work together. So that's the trade side of things. When it comes to this nuclear deal, which has been both supported by Russia, but at the same time, Russia says sanctions should not be used. That still seems to be the line from Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister, earlier today. He was saying that Russia and Iran believe there is no alternative to that joint comprehensive plan, but Russia, as it does in all situations, says sanctions should not be used. The reason why this plan exists is that Iran could very quickly turn its uranium nuclear enrichment, turn that uranium material into nuclear weapons very soon. And in fact, just earlier this week, the United States says it believes that it could turn its current stockpile of fissile material into enriched uranium within just 2 weeks, then potentially produce a bomb in the next few months. And that's what these parties to this discussion group are hoping to avoid. And Russia says it supports that. But there is concern amongst experts that the closer Iran and Russia get together in terms of trade and political worldview, the less willing Russia might be to impose pressure on Iran to stick to that agreement.
Stuart, we were just reporting the United Nations nuclear watchdog in Zaporizhzhia nuclear power station telling President Zelensky that Russia must withdraw from that nuclear power station. Is there any reaction to that in Moscow?
Yeah, well, the usual reaction about any claim that Russia should withdraw from that power plant is to say that this is a region, from the Russian point of view, which is now Russian. The whole region of Zaporizhzhia, including the power plant, are on Russian territory. And that's what's been at the centre of disputes about how to manage this area, with the IAEA wanting to create some kind of security zone, but at the same time, Russia not willing to remove troops. Now, one interesting thing from Rafael Grossi during his visit, he suggested that, indeed, a deal is potentially close, and the way it could work is by having safety measures specifically designated around the plant, not around the surrounding area of the plant, which is, from the Moscow point of view, Russian territory, and therefore should be defended as such. So a potential avenue there, and Russian diplomats still saying they support some kind of agreement that could provide safety for this plant.
Stuart, thank you for that. Our correspondent Stuart Smith in Moscow. You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, March of the Robots. Elon Musk and 1,000 tech leaders warn of the rise of artificial intelligence. We're in the United States. Next.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
There's a new agenda for a new world, accelerating change in almost every part of our lives. It's shifting the norms of how we work, travel, and connect. How we think, interact, and develop. It's a new reality, a new agenda with me, Juliette Mann.
Hello, welcome back. A reminder of our top stories. Asia's leaders set out their plans for sustainable growth and financial stability against a backdrop of rising geopolitical tension. Our other headlines: the United Nations nuclear watchdog says the situation at Ukraine's embattled nuclear power plant held by Russia has not improved during a rare visit to Europe's largest nuclear power station. And Iran's foreign minister held talks in Russia's capital with efforts to revive the 2015 nuclear deal high on the agenda. Saudi Arabia has applied to join the Shanghai Cooperation Organization after the decision was approved by Riyadh's cabinet. The SCO is a political and security union of countries spanning much of Eurasia, including India and Russia. This is Saudi state oil giant Aramco agreed to buy a 10% stake in China's Rongsheng Petrochemical Company for $3.6 billion. The kingdom is seeking to build trade ties with Asia and diversify its economy away from oil production. Well, let's talk to Sami Hamdi, Managing Director of International Interest, the global risk and intelligence company. Sami, welcome. Good to see you. For those of us who are not insiders to this, how significant is this?
I think it's a big deal within the context of what's been happening recently, particularly with regards to Saudi Arabia's very loud, very public, very ostentatious display of getting closer to China. Part of it, of course, despite Washington, with whom it has very strained ties. We saw them host Xi Jinping, the Chinese premier, in a lavish ceremony in the GCC China summit in Riyadh, a move that the allies such as the UAE stayed away from in order not to upset the Americans. Then, of course, for example, now we're seeing this idea of giving credit to China with regards to the truce with Iran. and now this idea of joining the Shanghai Cooperation Council. This is part of this very lavish display from Saudi Arabia, defiance of Washington to say, look, you tried to make me a pariah. I have other options now. I'm diversifying. I'm being accepted in the wider world. If it can't be you, it can be others. And this is why we're seeing this push towards China, which is more memorandum of understanding than actual substance as of yet. But nevertheless, the loud and public nature of it is what makes it significant, given that it shows that the ties are still strained with Saudi Arabia and that bin Salman so far is still looking to strong arm Washington.
Apparently, this move will give Saudi Arabia the status of a dialogue partner in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Is that a big deal? Is that significant?
I think that what's important to note is that the Shanghai Cooperation Council is a very loose alliance. I don't think it's necessarily comparable to other institutions such as BRICS, which China is also part of, where perhaps there is much closer economic ties. And this is why I think this is more symbolic than actual substance. It's more this idea of Saudi Arabia leaving a door open for Washington whilst suggesting that it will very sincerely establish very closer ties with China. And we've seen Washington react. We saw a military exercise in the desert with Saudi Arabia to counter drones, a response to bin Salman's, the Crown Prince bin Salman's long grievances regarding the lack of U.S. support in pushing back against drones in the region from the Houthis or from other militias in the region. So I think that when you look at it in terms of substance, it leaves many questions to be asked, but certainly in terms of the symbolism, it is very significant given that the pace in which this is taking place suggests that bin Salman is expecting answers very soon from Washington, or else he may actually enter the stage of substance.
Very briefly, what's in this for Saudi? What's in this for China?
For Saudi Arabia, what's in it is to try to pressure Washington to ease its antagonism and start making concessions with regards to arms, with regards to investments in order to make Vision 2030 or bin Salman's Vision 2030 a success. For China, the opportunity is that given the growing disgruntlement in the region, which is not unique to Saudi Arabia, given the UAE, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, all these nations are upset with the US. They're not happy with US policy. These are offering opportunities now for China, unprecedented opportunities for Chinese investment, greater Chinese political role. We saw China play a role in the Iran-Saudi Arabia resumption of diplomatic ties. The chances for China to exert greater influence in the region, given the doors are opening as a result of this disgruntlement.
Sami, good to see you. Thank you for that. Sami Hamdi, Managing Director of International Interest, the global risk and intelligence company. Elon Musk is one of more than 1,000 tech leaders who've signed an open letter calling for a pause in the training of advanced artificial intelligence systems that are more powerful than ChatGPT. They're warning that out-of-control development could pose a harm to civilization. Well, let's talk to our correspondent, John Terrett in New York. John, so Elon Musk chiming in just as artificial intelligence catches fire.
Exactly. This is a good story, and everyone should pay attention to this because the future is coming, and it's coming fast. Look, what we're talking about is AI, in particular ChatGPT, which I think has rather captured the imagination. It's produced by OpenAI, and it's the version number 4 that we're talking about. This is the one that can compose tunes and write a document, or précis a document, or indeed you can have a conversation with it if you want. Now, the thing is, we have a story running in America this morning asking people, would you get your taxes done by ChatGPT? And of course, the answer at the moment is no, because it's all still a bit too new. And it all comes as Disney yesterday rode back from its metaverse division, sacking 50 people but keeping the boss. It comes as Facebook looks increasingly silly for changing its name from Facebook to Meta Platforms. And it comes as our own Baidu last week had to cancel a public display of Ernie, which is their version of ChatGPT, because Ernie is simply not ready for prime time. He will be, but he just isn't there yet. So into this argument comes Elon Musk. Now, what's interesting about Musk is he's the co-founder of OpenAI, which produces ChatGPT, and the company is now invested heavily in by Microsoft. I think they've put money in about 3 times. But Musk is saying that AI at the moment is too risky for society. He's talking about the effect on jobs and society and civil norms, that sort of thing. He's calling for a 6-month pause in the development of this particular software, and he's not alone. 1,000 other industry experts and executives have signed an open letter saying the same thing, and saying only when the effects of AI are positive and the risks are manageable should we proceed. So it's calling for a 6-month moratorium, and they want safety protocols to be implemented and audited before they move forward. It seems to me as if the future, in some respects, if robots really do take over all our jobs, is pretty scary, Jamie.
John, the robot telling me about our timing on this programme says you've only got 10 seconds, but let me ask you another question and make it brief. The e-commerce giant Alibaba lighting up the markets.
Yes, Alibaba is going to split itself 6 ways. Each company will be able to have its own IPO. Jack Ma has been seen again in China. There's a myth about that man. That certainly cheered Wall Street up. Springtime mood here. The Dow is up 208 points, but the banking crisis has not gone away. Deutsche Bank and First Republic here must be watched very closely. Jamie?
John, see you in an hour. Thanks for that. Our correspondent John Terrace in New York. Staying with tech, China's ambassador to the UK has urged London to avoid politicising tech issues following the UK government's ban of TikTok on government devices. The ban on the social media app comes amid data sharing concerns and follows similar moves by the United States, Canada and the European Commission.
To describe TikTok as something that is controlled by the Chinese government is obviously overstretching the idea of national security and politicizing of a technical company. I think many young people love TikTok, and they will continue to use TikTok.
Overcrowding and poor conditions are to blame for a fire that killed at least 38 people at an immigration detention centre near the United States border in Mexico. That's according to human rights groups. The blaze started after a protest over deportations. Our correspondent Frank Contreras reports from Mexico City.
Security forces removing the dead from the Mexican migration center. Bodies wrapped in metallic blankets and placed in a parking lot. Authorities believe the fire began after some migrants found out they were being deported and then ignited small mattresses near the door. This distraught Venezuelan migrant woman desperately sought information about her loved one.
They don't say anything. You can have a relative die and they don't tell you he is dead. Nothing.
Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador, in a morning news conference Tuesday, said the victims were mostly Guatemalans and some Venezuelans. For months, detention centers and independent migrant shelters in Mexican border cities have been filled beyond capacity with the arrival of tens of thousands of migrants. The United States has been turning back asylum seekers and sending them to Mexico. As a result, the number of Latin Americans stuck in Ciudad Juarez has grown dramatically, along with their frustration. This tragedy is being called one of the deadliest ever at a Mexican immigration detention center. The Mexican government is moving quickly to identify the bodies and contact their families. Frank Contreras, CGTN.
Again, Asia's leaders set out their plans for sustainable growth and financial stability against a backdrop of rising geopolitical tension. Our other headlines: the United Nations nuclear watchdog says the situation at Ukraine's embattled nuclear power plant held by Russia has not improved during a rare visit to Europe's largest power station. And as we've been hearing, Elon Musk and 1,000 other tech leaders call for a pause in the training of advanced artificial intelligence amid concern that it could harm civilization. And that is the world today. Thank you for watching. There's more news on CGTN Europe's channel, on the Telegram app, or scan the QR code on the screen to get stories and updates sent direct to your phone. We're back with more news at the top of this hour. Coming up next, it's World Insight. For now, from all of the team in London, it's goodbye.